President Zelenskyy arrived at the White House a few minutes ago for a meeting that is likely to shape the future and the very borders of his country. This is a summit intended to bring the Ukraine war to a close, or at least to put a deal within reach. But at the heart of it are questions of territorial concessions the Ukrainian leader may find too painful to accept. This time, notably, he was wearing a jacket, not the military-style clothing that apparently offended Trump on his last visit.
It's an honor to have the President of Ukraine with us. We've had a lot of good discussions, a lot of good talks, and I think progress is being made, very substantial progress in many ways. We had a good meeting, as you know, just a short while ago with the President of Russia, and I think there's a possibility that something could come out of it, and today's meeting is very important. We have, I guess, the seven very powerful leaders from Europe, and we're going to be meeting with them right after this meeting, and thank you very much for being here.
Thanks to our partners, and that you supported this format, that after our meeting we can have leaders who are around us, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, EU, NATO, I mean all partners around Ukraine supporting us. Thanks to them, and thank you very much for invitation.
Thank you very much for being here.
An hour earlier, in effect, President Zelenskyy's outriders in Washington. The most powerful leaders in Europe were here to try and ensure that Ukraine is not carved up in a backroom deal. The British Prime Minister, the German Chancellor, the French President, NATO's Secretary General, the President of the EU Commission, all descended on the White House in one of the most unusual gatherings since the end of the Cold War. They had already met with Zelenskyy earlier in the day. Wargaming this afternoon's encounter in the Oval Office. Desperate to avert a repetition of the infamous ambush of 6 months ago.
Right now, you're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
The question this time around is whether Donald Trump is going to put sustained pressure on Zelenskyy to give up land to Russia, including parts of the Donbass region still being heavily contested. Overshadowing this extraordinary gathering of European leaders is the grim reality of the continuing Russian assault on eastern Ukraine. Overnight again, there have been heavy rocket barrages and drone strikes, including on these apartment blocks. Whether this was all timed to coincide with the Washington summit is unclear. President Zelenskyy certainly sees this as a cynical Kremlin gesture to show contempt for diplomacy and to intimidate Ukraine. Even before he touched down in Washington, the Prime Minister made clear he sees this as a defining moment in the conflict.
We've got to get this right. We've got to make sure there is peace, that it is lasting peace, and that it is fair and that it is just. And that's why I'm travelling to Washington with other European leaders.
Much depends on what secret understandings emerge from Alaska. What exactly did Putin say to President Trump, especially when they were alone? And will Russia accept Western troops acting as a security guarantee in Ukraine and patrolling a future ceasefire line? These are fateful hours for Ukraine and for the transatlantic alliance. What is agreed here today and what is not will shape the war and Europe's security. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
Well, let's go straight to the White House, where Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy are still addressing the press. Let's listen to what they have to say.
We spoke about it with President Trump, and I'm happy that we have now bilateral decisions, and we work on it with production, American production. Nobody in Europe has so many air defense like Patriots, for example. We need it very much, and this is also about defending.
President Zelenskyy,
I think the good news, we make the best.
Yeah, well, US correspondent Dan Rivers is at the White House. Dan, what do you make of what you've heard and seen so far?
Well, certainly the greeting that Donald Trump gave President Zelenskyy when he arrived appeared to be warm and cordial. He clearly approved of the fact that President Zelenskyy was wearing a black suit jacket this time. And so far he has sort of been trying Donald Trump in this press conference, which is still ongoing, to, you know, batting away this idea that he should have got a ceasefire first. He just said, you know, he didn't get a ceasefire in any of the other 6 wars that he claims to have solved. And he thinks, you know, in an ideal world, it would be good to have got a ceasefire for this one. But he could see that that would be a strategic disadvantage for one side or the other. And so he's defending this idea of effectively doing a bit of a U-turn on the issue of getting a ceasefire first as a way of opening up the space for talks. He thinks they can negotiate a final deal while the fighting is carrying on. And this is what he said just a few moments ago on the subject of security guarantees.
We're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia. We're going to work with Ukraine, and we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it.
So one of the kind of thorniest issues, which hasn't really kind of come up directly so far in the questions to President Zelenskyy or Trump, is the issue of territory and, you know, whether President Zelenskyy will entertain the idea of surrendering more territory to the Russians as a way of securing this peace deal. I think that's going to be one of the most difficult things for President Zelenskyy to have to swallow. But President Trump kind of put it pretty pithily. He said they are looking for an everlasting peace, and he hopes they can achieve that immediately.
OK, Dan Rivers, for the moment, thank you. No doubt we'll be back to you during the next hour. But let's have a closer look at the way things stand at the moment. This is the front line currently after nearly 3.5 years of fighting. Russia controls around 20% of Ukraine, shown on the map here. Now, Donald Trump has already said Ukraine would not be getting back Crimea, the Black Sea Peninsula, illegally occupied and annexed by Russia since 2014. At Friday's Alaska summit, Putin demanded that Russia permanently occupy all of the Donbass in eastern Ukraine, made up of Luhansk and Donetsk. Now, Luhansk is already almost entirely under Russian control, but Ukraine still controls around 30% of Donetsk, where currently some of the most ferocious fighting of the war is taking place. Zelenskyy has rejected Putin's demand that Ukraine surrender the Donbass region. And our global security editor, Rohit Khatru, is here with more on this. What do we expect is going to be the outcome of this meeting?
Well, we're waiting to hear, and we're looking at the picture from the Oval Office now. I think there have been some concessions already from Donald Trump. You know, he has said already that the US won't pull support for Ukraine if today's meeting doesn't go well. But the fundamental question still hasn't been answered, which is, will Donald Trump try and coerce President Zelenskyy at this meeting into conceding land and giving up to some of the concessions that were presented to him by Vladimir Putin of Russia on Friday night? Look at this picture here. You can see Winston Churchill, top right of screen. And there is such a contrast here, because here is a war leader who never wore a suit as he led a country at war. Here is Vladimir Zelenksky, who has had to do that. He's wearing a matching jacket and trousers. You know, it might not look like a suit, but that's important. This is more than a sartorial question. This is a question about, in Donald Trump's view, respect. But many people will see this. What he's done here, after almost 4 years of this war, wearing these army fatigues day after day, giving in to his request.
Because he said he would only wear them once the war was finished.
Absolutely, and you know, this looks like a small matter, but actually it's a big one. It's about the strategy employed by Vladimir Zelenskyy, encouraged by his allies, including the UK government. Here is a man who has learned the lessons of what happened in February. He said, thank you, thank you, thank you, over again. Remember, in February, he was told by his hosts that he hadn't even said thank you. He ensured that he did that immediately, over and over again. Here is a man who knows that his words here could chart the future course of this conflict. But it's not quite clear, you know, Zelensky's been saying a lot more than Trump has over the last few minutes. And so we're going to keep listening in to hear how this goes, because shortly we'll hear from his European allies, from Keir Starmer and from others who have been sent there, not only as advisors, but as kind of bodyguards. And that will be a crucial moment. But yeah, we're going to keep listening.